So, hi viewers. We are going to record our first podcast, and Prisha is here with us to talk a lot about tech philanthropy, and we'll get a lot of insights from her. So, without wasting much time, I think let's begin with defining tech philanthropy. So, Prisha, we would like to know the exact definition of tech philanthropy. We have heard a lot about this term called philanthropy in terms of tech philanthropists, for example, the Infosys Foundation, Bill Gates, Azim Premji, and others. But what do you think this tech philanthropy mean in the context of, let's say, public policy? So please throw some light on it.
Okay, yes. Hi, Arpit. So, tech philanthropy basically refers to just large-scale donations and investments by tech giants or their founders to address global issues such as health, poverty, and education. And so these tech philanthropies, while they play a major role in just improving the impact space in general, they
Mm.
also have huge implications for the policy sector. So because these tech philanthropists they work so closely with the government,
Right.
so they end up shaping public policies in unexpected ways, and we'll obviously dive into that later.
Mm.
But for now, if I just have to give you examples of tech philanthropies from India or maybe abroad, then the first name, as you also mentioned, that comes to mind is the Gates Foundation, which is doing some phenomenal work in the health sector.
Right.
For example, just eradication of polio, eradication of malaria, and they also did some amazing work uh, during the COVID pandemic, where they distributed COVID vaccines.
Mm.
So that is one global example. And if I have to talk in the Indian context, then one prominent name that comes to mind is the Tata Trust.
Right.
So Tata Trust is also doing some amazing work in the education and the health sector. Um, and other names, other prominent names from India include Wipro Cares. Then we have the, as you mentioned, the Azim Premji Foundation, Infosys Foundation. So these are just some of the examples.
Okay. So, uh, in the impact space, I am sure you're coming from that background. So I would like to know a bit on, like, as you know, the impact space is rapidly evolving. Why do you think there's a need of pressing need for a technology-driven side of shaping this public policy, as we just had a discussion. So, please provide some real-world examples to explain the same, and let's say some tech solutions like uh, data analytics or let's say blockchain and I would say collaborative platforms, like how they have been able to impact the outcomes and also build trust between the donors and let's say the beneficiaries.
Okay. Arpit, as I mentioned earlier, tech philanthropy has really changed the impact sector.
Hmm.
Um, and like I can think of three very obvious ways in which it has done so. So
Hmm.
first would be just data driven decisions. So
Right.
technology allows tech philanthropy basically allows more real time data tracking and also just to modify decisions as per real time data. So
Hmm.
that is one way in which it is changing the impact sector. The other could be scalability.
Hmm.
So with so digital platforms help to scale operations at a much larger scale
Right.
than was earlier possible.
Hmm.
And the third would be just more enhanced collaboration. So
Yes.
technology allows for people from different spaces and different backgrounds to come together to contribute to the impact space, and
Correct.
it also helps to just be more accountable to donors and stakeholders involved. So those are just three very obvious ways.
Hmm.
One, and this is probably one of the biggest ways in which tech philanthropy is changing the impact sector. It's by increasing transparency.
Right.
So tech basically allows for, as I mentioned earlier, real time data tracking,
Hmm.
so that also, apart from just improved decision making, that also enhances transparency
Hmm.
of these operations.
Hmm.
So it has made the impact sector like much more financially just efficient in that sense.
Hmm.
And also just as I mentioned earlier, it allows for just clear communication between different stakeholders involved in the process. So these are just some of the ways in which tech philanthropy is actually just making changes to the impact space.
Okay. So, like one of the, uh, I would say, a very fascinating aspects of tech philanthropy has, like, how these efforts have influenced the public policy. For example, if I can remember an example from the last decade, uh, the Aadhaar project, the UIDAI project, where Nandan Nilekani, one of the founders of Infosys, was tasked with the, I mean, basically he was given the charge to lead the project. So like he showed how tech driven solutions can actually influence public governance, where we see Aadhaar is has grown so much, so widely. We see applications across the domains, so especially in the context of social welfare. So
Mm.
of course, I mean, it does make some sense that it is tech driven.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay, so as we discussed earlier, so tech philanthropy impacts the impact sector in several ways. So one of the most prominent ways in which tech philanthropy affects the impact space and also the public policy space is
Hmm.
that it partners with governments to solve public issues.
Correct,
And
correct.
in that process, it sometimes ends up bypassing just traditional government structures.
Right.
So, just referring back to an earlier example that I gave.
Hmm.
So during the COVID pandemic,
Hmm.
the Gates Foundation partnered with WHO
Hmm.
and bypassed the central government to spread vaccination not just in his country but also globally.
Right.
So so and also so while tech philanthropy can influence policy by addressing gaps in just government structures in general, but it also runs the risk of just some
True.
power getting consolidated in the hands of just some few individuals who then end up just shaping public priorities and public policy. So, and obviously, we'll delve into that.
So yeah, so that's a very interesting insight, I would rather say, that you have brought in. So let's dive a bit deeper into it, especially the last part that you just mentioned. So an important consideration of this discussion could be the ethical implications. What are the ethical implications of the tech philanthropy? Like, should the billionaires or the billionaires that you just mentioned have so much influence over the public policy, especially when they're not elected by the people? So should they be given that level of power? So what?
Okay. So Arpit, I feel that it's a fine line to tread. On one hand, there are these contributions by tech giants can bring about transformative changes, but
Hmm.
on the other hand, there's the risk of creating an unbalanced power structure where private individuals control resources that shape public life.
Right,
So, and also normally the private sector's involvement in public policy is usually viewed as problematic.
right,
So, and just to explain that further, so philanthropic efforts in policy making can lead to just greater corporate influence over government decisions,
hmm,
thereby sidelining public interests in general. So, and if I have to substantiate what I just said with just examples, so, as I mentioned earlier, the role played by Gates Foundation during the COVID pandemic.
hmm,
So that shift in power highlighted the growing role of just private philanthropy and tech philanthropy in just setting global health priorities.
right,
So, and a lot of global players saw the Gates Foundation playing a central role in just dictating COVID-19 vaccine access and
right.
global health policy.
Okay.
So another example would be company like Infosys and Tata, they worked on in India, they worked on government projects like the Aadhaar and GST software development.
Hmm,
Another prominent example of just a tech giant influencing public policy to
hmm,
basically further its own interests occurred with Facebook, or Meta as we know it,
hmm,
during its involvement in the Cambridge Analytica scandal.
hmm,
So just Facebook's lobbying efforts uh, and its influence on just data privacy regulations delayed stronger policy actions globally,
Okay.
allowing it to just continue with its malpractices for a very long time. So
Okay.
that is another example. And I also believe that we cannot end this discussion without discussing the role of tech philanthropy in the financial space, specifically in India.
Hmm.
So, so while the involvement of these tech giants can really spur innovation and improve customer experience,
Hmm.
uh, the Reserve Bank of India has warned that their dominance may stifle competition, encourage risky lending practices,
Hmm.
and just create dependencies that reduce market stability.
Okay.
So these are just some of the ways in which tech philanthropy is impacting the public policy space in a negative way, I would say.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, like, for example, the last example that you gave, that was around the financial side. So, I may be able to quote a positive example as well at the moment, because I
Hmm.
was going through it. So, there's a company known as Zerodha. So they
Hmm.
are very active in developing fintech products and
Hmm.
services, and they are very big advocates of open source software. So they are one of them, one of the biggest promoters of the FOSS Act. So under that, what they have, I mean, as per the Government of India policy back in 2015, that promotes the use of open source software in the e-governance or almost all sectors. And so there has been a push from the government side, but Zerodha has promised a floss fund. They refer it to as the free libre or open source software fund, which is close to 1 million US dollars per year. So
Hmm.
which will actually help these small scale open source developers to come forward with their products, and they do not need to worry about the funding. So in that sense, there have been examples which are more on the constructive side as well. But of course, long term, we cannot commit right now. Just to wrap up what we just discussed, uh, tech philanthropy is undoubtedly a game changer in the world of public policy, as we discussed with certain examples. But it can also bring some much needed resources and innovation. For example, the driving forces that you were talking about, and those issues and those tech could also be addressing the societal issues, but also raises questions about the balance of power and influence in the democratic process, I would rather say. So I hope.
I think no, I completely agree with you, Arpit, and I think you've summarized it pretty beautifully. But I would just like to add my 2 cents to that. So we can think of tech philanthropy as a necessary evil. So the role of tech philanthropy is going to expand in the coming years with just a increased pressure on government to meet SDG targets, and
Correct.
also just a growing role of tech in our day-to-day life
Correct.
with the advent of AI and machine learning.
Hmm.
So we may see more partnerships between government and tech philanthropies to tackle global challenges.
Hmm.
However, I think there needs to be like a stronger push for this accountability, transparency, and perhaps even a shift towards like more regulated forms of philanthropy,
Right.
especially as we see uh, power getting increasingly consolidated in the hands of a few tech giants.
Correct. Correct.
So that is just something I would like to add.
Okay, yeah. So I think thanks. I would like to thank you for joining us today. And to our viewers, I would like to tell you that this was the first podcast, and we'll have a lot more coming. And we hope that this conversation has already given you a deeper understanding of what we just discussed. That was tech philanthropy and its intersection with public policy. So we look forward to more such topics, and therefore I would request you to share it with your friends and subscribe to our channel. The channel will be named after this video is recorded. Thank you so much. Yeah, thank
Thank
you,
you. Thank
Prisha.
you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Arpit.